Hi, my name is Fabrice. I am a trained architect. I actually graduated last millennium from Paris. I studied in Paris and London, and I've been doing Archviz since 1996. I was very fortunate to work with a lot of big firms like Google, Heatherwick Studios, Nike, Bentley, Zaha Hadid, and so on. So a broad kind of experience working for architects and brands. And I've been working with Unreal since 2016 and teaching with Epic and creating content in Unreal Engine, as well as working for clients. I have a website with my name, fabricebourrelly.com, where you can find out more about me and obviously some videos on YouTube. So I'd like to take you through one of the Archviz scenes that I've created recently and show you a little bit more how to create something like that very quickly using Unreal and obviously in real time. So I'll see you in just a minute behind my shoulder. Okay, so we are going to look at this scene, and I'll walk you through how to build it, basically how I build it from scratch, and mainly show you how we can end up creating a walkthrough animation, basically in Unreal Engine in a very, very quick and a short amount of time like this. So an animation basically like this with the lights turning on. So we're kind of using a procedural sky here with using ray tracing and a global illumination. And everything is kind of happening in real time. So the idea here is to kind of show you how once you know where everything is, it's really easy and pretty simple actually to set something up like that, and very importantly is very, very quick. So we can actually render this animation now in just a few minutes to send to a client or for review or to submit. So here what we'll do mainly is kind of set up the building and then have this. So one will be the sky turning from day to night, so with the sun. And then we'll have these lights turning on here, these artificial lights. And then you'll see the inside of the building also kind of lights up like that. So it's a fairly elaborate number of items of effects we have, because we also have this kind of automatic bloom and kind of lens flare that is quite seductive, and then again a sort of lens flare here maybe, which is maybe a little bit too strong, but will add a great amounts of effect, again, which is something which would require quite a lot using offline render workflows. So here again, using sequencer. Just a little reference to these people I'm using. If you're interested to download for yourself, there's a free pack here that you can find on the marketplace, and these are the ones that I've used, especially this guy, which is hilarious, which we'll have a little look later here, wherever he is, a dancer here. So he's quite funny. So if you want to use that for yourself, and the rest is the building, I'll actually say just a little bit about that. I'll come out of the sequencer here, and this building I actually used from an original model by 3dsky.com, I think it is, and I used this as a template to create some modules. There we go. So I kind of got a building from this site, and used kind of as a template to create some of these modules which we'll find here. So I'll show you a little bit about this building that I created here. And for that, I'll go into the default viewport here. For some reason, it doesn't display otherwise. So the way that this was created was just using a fairly simple and common method, which is simple and common method in game design and game creation, namely kind of Minecraft or even Fortnite, which are basically using this grid, which is inherent in all Unreal Engine scenes, which is basically a 1 meter by 1 meter square grid. So the way that I actually did that, if I use the meshes here, no, actually the geometry, is that basically we have a box here, which is going to be aligned to the grid. So I'll reset its position so that it's kind of aligned to the grid by default, and I'll set the grid snap to 1. And we can see that this box here is basically perfectly lined to this 1 by 1 meter grid. And with my Alt key, I can actually duplicate this box. And you can see that it basically acts as a placeholder. I'm actually going to move the tree a little bit. It acts like a placeholder, which in the architectural process of design is very common to at this stage, that is called massing design. So we can actually sort of copy, and then we'll end up with a sort of fairly bulky piece of geometry that we can sort of sculpt and, you know, maybe take bits out and start designing this way, the mass that way. So then, using this technique, we are able to basically very simply swap the static mesh, basically this here, the mesh that this kind of actor in the scene is holding, with a different template, with a different panel, for example, in this case. Okay, for example, with these ones, I can actually swap them for this interfloor panel here, like that. And I'll just copy these so you can see that these are actually snapping straight onto the grid, which is a little bit of a special case in architectural design. Grids are very, very, very common. However, they tend to be rotated, different kind of proportions, rectangular and so on. If you've got to do anything with design in your profession, this will be no secret to you. And however, here we are limited to a 1 meter by 1 meter grid that is orthogonal and orthogonal to the world. So it's a kind of a special situation where which will work in this instance because and with these restraints. But however, in architecture, this is actually very, very cheap to build, and it's an interesting way to approach design, I believe. So here we can take one step further, and for example, I've got sort of, 6 or 7 or however many initial modules here that I can now kind of swap at however I want in order to create the design or just the look that I want. Okay, so here, and we can swap that with just a panel. So here we can go even more elaborate in the sense that I've kind of got here a sort of floor unit, and then I can swap that for a balcony. Okay, we can add one here if we want. So this is a kind of a personal interest, I guess, but I find it very interesting that we are at a kind of the meeting point between architecture, industry, gaming, aeronautics, car design, everything is kind of meeting all around the use of the software. And here we have kind of new technologies that maybe will allow us to develop design in a new and interesting way. That being said, this type of building could very well come out of Revit, 3ds Max, SketchUp, Rhino, any kind of CAD software would be able to, is kind of, standard to output this kind of building and this kind of final look. So this model could be very well being imported either from from either of these software. I just took the liberty to model it this way inside of Unreal out of curiosity, and I thought I'd just share that with you. Okay, that being said, let's recreate this little world together. So I've actually done one before, so I'll delete that, and I'll just create a blank scene here, a completely blank level. We'll just open that, and I'll just save what I've done before. And here, this is how I usually like to start, with a completely blank scene. We'll use a site that I actually imported using Datasmith, and then I'll just reset the position so that it's kind of at the center of the world, as it were. So here we'll have a good, very useful viewpoint view mode to enable us to check the model, like in a CAD software almost. And then I'll use actually a collapsed version of my building that I basically put together in Unreal. I'll use my angle snap to put it in the right direction. I've modeled in Unreal, but out of these modules that I was just talking about. So the great thing is that I'm able to put it together in Unreal effectively, and I'll get rid of my angle snap of my grid snap to kind of place this manually here. But the idea is that once that initial kind of layout was made, I can select them all and merge the model into one. So this is also very, very efficient for being able to carry out this kind of operation. So again, I can now very simply and very quickly develop this site. Again, here I'm just duplicating things in a way which is very common when you build out games, and Unreal is very, very powerful at using instances like that. So I've actually got a couple of trees that I've modeled and used extensively. These trees are coming straight out of 3ds Max and without any optimization. So I wouldn't recommend them for a game or maybe even sort of widespread real-time use. But in this instance, they work very well namely for creating movies or working on high-end sort of professional machines. I'll add a couple of these little benches, which again work very well. The idea of procedural design in a way. Here, for example, I'm able to use the scale tool to just change the size of those at length. So at ease, without the need to have a model or anything like that. So this is really useful to be able to make changes and see things as they are straight in the viewport. Okay, and I'll put one over there. And I might move my tree back. Okay, so this this kind of unlit mode is pretty good for checking the model, but we kind of really want to make things look a little bit more interesting than that. So let's place a directional light, and we'll go into the lighting only mode here. And we'll place the directional light over there so that it gives us a nice shadow on our building here, like that. Since I'm actually working in ray tracing, I'm going to set that directional light onto movable, mainly to get rid of the preview button. And once that's done, I've kind of looked at my shadow shapes, as it were, to see where my shadows are. I'm quite happy to go back to lit mode, sorry. Okay, so now we can start adding a little bit of vegetation here on the ground. So these are very, very basic models, again, that I've mainly loaded for demo purposes, but we'll use the foliage tool where we can simply drag and drop any kind of preloaded foliage or indeed assets and start painting on them. So the way I like to do it is to use this single mode, and this has been pre-configured to have a variation of scale between 2 and 5. So they're not kind of too small or too big. And I like to sort of take control of and being able to be a little bit careful of how many of these assets I'm going to put down, because again, I'm using assets which have not really been optimized for game use and for distribution on consoles or things like that. Again, this mainly looking at running on high-end CAD enabled machines, as it were. Okay, so I'll just build the foreground again very, very quickly here, and we'll see that we are able to build up the scene very, very quickly. So in fact, I'll add a few of these trees as well. So I'll go back to my tree, and I'd like to add this tree, and I'll point out that here we've got nearly 1 million triangles for this asset here, for this tree. And again, using my single mode, and I'm actually going to use that tree and disable align to normal. So with that, and I'll add a few over there to just to give me the ability to have more shadows. And you can see that Unreal is absolutely happy dealing with that. Okay, so now we are well, there's a few things that we want to do. I've got quite a big bloom effect here. So we're going to bring our trusted post-process volume, which will help us towards making a number of additions and effects into the scene to make things look more realistic. So first thing, I'll enable the infinite extent so that the post-process volume acts on the entire scene, and I'll go into the bloom intensity, just turn that down a little bit, and also the lens flare here, I'll just turn that way down to about 0.1, so everything's a little bit clearer. I want to add some sky, so we'll do that now. We'll place the new actor, the atmospheric skies. I'll find that, and I'll use the sky atmosphere. I'll place that, and what I'll want to do is link the sky with the sun. So here I'll select the directional light again, show advanced, because that setting is hidden there. Well, not hidden, but just in the advanced tab. And we can link those together. So you can see that suddenly I've got a sky. So what we are missing is our the little bit of fill light here from the sky. So we need to find our skylight. So we'll bring the skylight. And here we go. So the skylight here is kind of not doing us a favor. It's kind of too blue, isn't it? So I'll with the skylight again selected, we'll go into the details panel, and we'll set it first of all on movable, and we'll enable here the ray trace shadows from the skylight. So we'll see that immediately we get a much better look. Okay, so now we actually have a completely procedural sky that changes color as the time of day changes here, and that's very useful. Okay. So if we want to set this in an animation, all we need to do at this minute is basically change the angle of the sun, and we'll have an animation going day to night. So that's how simple it is. So I'll create a level sequence here, and I'll just keep the default name. And if I want to change the angle of the sun, all I need to do is, with my directional light selected, click on this track button and add the directional light. So like I was saying, all you need really is to know where things are, like this track button, and very simply you can animate your light this way. So again, in track here, I'll set a transform, which gives me a rotation. So I'll enable that as a key, and then slide to the end, and then enable that, another key there, and change my rotation. And now I have the animation of the sun. Maybe I'll move that a little bit further up. Okay, I can actually enable the cinematic viewport, which will be a little bit more convenient. So I've kind of jumped out of my viewpoint here, which is fine because we'll create a camera to fix the viewpoint. So here in the sequencer, we can just have the camera straight away. And that gives me a good setup here. So it's kind of useful to have this framed here straight away. So I can have, I can add a few of my people here, a few actors, to give the sense of life in the scene and a little bit of drama, maybe, if that's not too pretentious. So I'll narrow everything up, and here I've actually got loaded some people. So I'll place these here. Oh, I've got two of them. This lady with her child coming out, and this guy is going to do a nice dance for us. And I have also a couple of these people here. So a lady here on the bench. I've kind of used these before, so they seem to work this way. Okay, so here we are. So now everything seems to be working well for us. So what we'll need to do now is add some lights for the night scene. In fact, I'll move the sun up a little bit for a little bit more contrast. Okay. Okay, so now I'll move the slider a little bit over this way so that I can see what I'm doing. So it almost acts like a time of day slider. And here I'll take this opportunity to add a few of these spotlights. So I'll exit the camera view, and I'll go a little bit closer here. So I'll get rid of the lighting needs to be rebuilt. I'll just set this light onto movable. We're in ray tracing, so it doesn't really matter. We don't need to build the lighting or anything like that. I'll just open the cone angle, and very simply I'll load up an IES file, which will give me a very realistic look for this light. And here I can even just sort of reduce the attenuation radius a little bit for kind of optimization purposes, really. And I'll warm the light a little bit. Great. So now all we need to do is basically duplicate these lights very, very quickly like that with no effort. And again, I am helped by the fact that everything is on a grid, respecting the grid. So it's kind of helping us in the design this way, in a way. And I'll place a couple more over there. And you can see that I haven't bothered too much about organizing this file, but the way that I will manage to turn these lights on and off at the right moment is by actually creating a different level and setting them on that level. So with all these lights selected, I've actually got my levels open, and I'll just create a new with selected actors. So here I've got one created there. I'll save that. Lights, and now you'll see that these lights, if I turn that level off, they will disappear. Alright, so let's just add them to the sequencer now. We'll go, I'll add a track to sequencer, and it says level visibility track. Okay, so it says visible. I'll add another one that says hidden, and I'll start off with hidden. So here we'll go into the track here, say properties, and we'll create a new array, and the name has to be lights, exactly the same as that one. So that will be visible at about this time, and we'll set the hidden for there, and we need to also say properties and call that lights. And you see that now they are hidden, and then they will be visible. Great. So we can set that a little bit earlier. Dusk time. Okay. And now all we have to do left after we can assign the a little animation to the camera, but we'll do that at the end. I'd like to introduce you to these amazing what I call interior cube maps, and we'll just place a very simple plane there. So I'll just drag and drop a plane from the place actors panel here and just select it. Where's my plane gone? There, I've got it. And let me just exit. I'll exit the sequencer for now, because just to make sure. Ah, yes, and I need to place my plane on the main level here. So I've got it on the main level. Just checking. Okay, great. So now this plane I'm going to rotate and place behind the windows, and assign this material that I've created, which I call interior cube map. So let me create, let me just double check this one that we have. We'll use the intensity. We'll change that in just a sec. Save that. And now I will assign this interior cube map here. Okay, and I will make sure that this is the right orientation. Okay, so now we have, what we have is basically an HDRI which acts, so if I press F, so maybe it's a little bit too intense. I'll reduce the intensity of here, 0.2, say 0.1, and we'll have the illusion of looking inside a room. Okay, so this is very powerful in architecture. You know, we can combine many of these and give a very realistic sense of having life inside. So here I'm kind of going to take a few shortcuts and just use the one interior cube map here, which was which I got from HDRI Heaven actually, and I'll just point that out very quickly here. There's HDRIs which are indoors here, and I always look for these hot spots here that we have in the ceilings and things like that for some of the rooms. So you can see how you can use different colors and will give you a very realistic look. So I'll just use the one for now for simplicity, and I'm just going to scale these very simply like that, and I'll just copy a few around. So using the gizmo, how I've ended up in the tree. So here we go. And we have that one here and that one here that I can scale a little bit further. Okay, so now I'm actually going to keep that open and keep that for in just a minute. And so what we want is to be able to tweak this material that we've just created, this interior cube map material. So here I've actually got something quite clever, which is called a what is it called? Material parameter collection. And the way I get that is just by in the materials and texture create a material parameter collection. Then I can actually, I'll delete this one, I can actually drag and drop that into my material and set that to set intensity. So now, if I link this and save my interior cube map, my interior cube maps will actually turn to black, which kind of is what I want. And I can go back to my track and add this material parameter collection. So I can select my intensity from here, and at this point set a key, which I can give a value of and turn my lights on. So now, very simply, I can create a key like this and set that to be 0, and the lights will turn on shortly after these lights turn on. So finally, we can take our camera, and same here we have the ability to show this point. So bring that, snap that to the beginning, and then we'll create another key at the end and move the camera with our auto key enabled here. It's a little bit dark at the end, so I'll change the angle of the sun to maybe not be so intense at the very end, but we'll have something like that. Okay, change the angle, snap, so a little bit subtle. There we go. And here we are. So that's the whole animation done in very, very, very little time without having to do too much of complicated things. So I'll leave you with this little bonus here. I'll move him towards the end a little bit, because our friend, I'll actually place a little rect light on top of him, a bit like a stage light, to give him a little bit more focus here. And if I actually press play at the same time, he's going to start hopefully a little, sorry, if I press, simulate, he should be able to start giving him a little dance. Oh, maybe I put the wrong one. So let's see. Yes, I put the wrong one. So I'll stop the animation now. And so I'll put this one here, and I'll put this one instead. And here we go. There we go. So it's starting its dance, and we can actually play this animation at the same time, which is pretty incredible, if you ask me. So maybe it's playing a little bit quickly. I'll just slow down. Or scrub. So this is really the advantage of being completely in real time. As you see, we can make all these adjustments. I'll kind of just stop that briefly to turn these spotlights a little bit down, maybe to about 4. Temperature maybe a little bit warmer again, and you can see that really we have the ability to make all these changes completely in real time, and have a very, very quick feedback, and obviously change the design and so on. So I hope this was interesting and inspiring. This is actually part of a class that I teach also for Epic, so I look forward to seeing you on a on a live class, and I look forward to answering your questions as well. Thank you very much for your attention, and see you next time.